in terms of the bills that are high profile that have not yet made crossover, I want to focus on those, but I'd first like to start with one that deals with financial literacy course, and this has been receiving a whole lot of press. I know that our Lieutenant Governor has been a big advocate behind that, so if I might take a moment to turn it over to the Lieutenant Governor if he wants to give us some concept behind that bill.
Sure. I'm assuming, thank you, Cecilia, I'm assuming that everybody's kind of aware of this or been made aware of this. The intent of the financial literacy and economics legislation is to create a 4-credit class for high school. I mean, we've had financial literacy and economics in high school before, but not for credit as an elective course, and obviously students are competing for GPAs to get into college, and so most students by far do not take this course. Obviously, it goes without saying, but we have $22 trillion in debt in this nation. Our largest form of personal debt is student loan debt at $1.6 trillion and growing every single day. We have over $130 trillion of unfunded liabilities or promises made to people that we have no funds in the bank to pay for a long-term future. And so I think, you know, what we have is a lot of students, not to their fault at all, graduating high school that don't have a firm concept of economics and financial literacy. And I think that it is, you know, there's overwhelming support in the community. People see this, they see the need for this. Even a lot of the people that have been taking the training and for these courses in other states like Virginia, who this legislation is modeled after, even the teachers come away from that training going, wow, I wish I would have known this in high school. How come we didn't know this already? And so I think it's good across the board, not just for our students, but for our adults as well, and even for our families, because I think the students take this back into their homes as well and can you know, teach their parents some of these concepts. A lot of people would say, well, you know, it's a lot of work to have a 4-credit class for balancing your checkbook, and that's not about balancing your checkbook. That would be one aspect of it, but there's a whole slew of things this is about. I don't know, Jamie Falkenberry from my office is here. I don't know if you've passed out that information or not, but Jamie's got he's got the curriculum as it would be laid out through the standards here. He'll pass that out. I would also encourage everybody to read the legislation because there's been a lot of misinformation related to what's actually in the bill itself and how we go about doing that. One of the big pieces of controversy has been about adding things onto the teacher's plate. I can say that there's probably no bigger proponent than me of saying we don't need to add anything additional onto the teacher's workload for sure. But at the same time, we've been working, our staff and legislative staff has been working with DPI and others to work this into the rework of social studies standards. That was being done anyway. We were at that point in time, that 5-year period where we were going to be reworking social studies, so working this into that. So the intent is to make sure that we're not adding anything additional onto the plates of these teachers, and also to note that it's not just social studies teachers who can teach this, that any teacher can go and get this training over the summer, get their $500 stipend for taking this training, and then go back and be able to teach financial literacy. So we're kind of spreading that love around as well to other teachers. And anyway, that's a kind of a broad update. I guess, Cecilia, what I'd be interested in is if anybody has questions to maybe dive a little bit deeper into some specific things that you might be interested in asking.
Dr. Oxendine.
I know my question is going to go in the weeds. I'll just go ahead and say that. So I'll probably have to talk with the curriculum department division on this. So it's in social studies. I'm looking at standards, content standards, 1 through several standards. So these standards are coming straight from the standard course of study in social studies. Is that correct?
The standards you're reading or the ones that
The ones that are on this page?
The ones that are on that page that Jamie just passed out, those are the new standards that are being created for this course.
Okay. This looks good. I'll do some further talks with the curriculum division on this.
Jamie. Yeah.
Yes, sure.
The standards that you have are the economic standards. There's also financial literacy standards that are similar to what we've already been teaching in our schools, except they're a little bit more detailed. But what we find is when we talk to people with a lot of stakeholders, they say, well, why don't we just keep this as a half course credit or just push this in with something else? It's impossible to do when you include the economic standards as well.
Right.
And just take some time, and it may take you 5 minutes just to read through them, but you'll see how much more in depth they go.
Very good.
And the knowledge that the students will learn from this. And what we've seen in other states that have implemented this, their teachers actually benefit a lot from understanding the curriculum that's involved with that.
I'm impressed.
Mr. Ford.
Sure. And as the Lieutenant Governor said, we did not want to put we don't want to add another hour onto another course. And having talked with everyone from the CTE department to the social studies, the curriculum, the DPI, to the superintendent and their staff, as well as the General Assembly, it was an agreement that I believe that we're one of only 2 states in the nation, I'll have to get you on this, but that have multiple history courses spread out. And I believe that the social studies department here was already looking at realigning some of the standards. So
For American history.
for American history, sorry about that. For American history. So what we're doing is, what the legislation says is that the 4th social studies credit will be this economics and personal finance course, and then it will be up to you, the state board, to approve what DPI lays forward with the other 3 courses, one of which will, the Senate version is that there will still be the founding principles, but the founding principles can include early American history as well.
Mr. Ford.
Appreciate that. So what we have before us here are the economic standards, right?
Those are just the economic standards, because the financial literacy standards that we'll be using from that's in the legislation are similar to what we're doing right now, but they're a little bit more in depth. I can get you a copy of those too.
They're
Yeah,
still
like
being,
I said.
they're still being created.
They're still being
Why don't You
created,
can tell them
yes.
about the commission that's put together to create those, if you would, just update
Well,
them on.
yeah, if you don't mind, like who's the entity that's creating both this and the financial literacy?
Sure.
standards?
So we're using what it's called the Council of Economic for Education. It's a national organization that is a lot of accreditation across the nation on educating students as well as adults on financial literacy and economics. And we're using their best practices that have been used in other states. What we're using is specific standards too. The ones that were done after the financial crisis in 2009 for financial literacy, and then the economic standards that they released in 2013. And we're purposely using those specific standards because they've already been benchmarked and used throughout the nation, but we also don't want to get into a situation before where we just say we're going to accept the Council of Economic Standards and then get into the Common Core situation again where an entity owns the standards, and we don't want to say we're using the most current version, because then we lose control over those standards. So if the Council for Economic Education at any time changes their standards, we will be using the ones that we've already approved and that we can move around and
So
use for our
North
state.
Carolina will approve their own
Yeah,
standards.
yes, but they will be modeled off these standards. So we can add to whatever we want. And the legislation right now, even the Council for Economic Education doesn't include how to pay and save for college, and that's in the legislation right now. So you as the state board can say, well, I don't know, there's a certain topic that these standards don't cover and you feel really passionate about it, then we can include that standard.
The board will have final
The
approval.
board will
on
have
Mr.
final
Ford.
approval.
And this may be counterproductive because we may not be able to do anything about it from here, but the financial literacy piece I get. Having taught civics and economics, I know a lot of these concepts are things that we teach in our course, right? So I'm just like wondering, what was the impetus of the calculus behind creating a separate sort of course to focus in on just the macroeconomic pieces of that?
It's a very good question. What we've found out from the field, and this is no fault of the teachers at all, is that either there are some schools that are doing this great. So I'm not speaking for all, but for a lot of sections, the teachers didn't either feel comfortable teaching it, or they did not have the background to teach it. Therefore, they glanced over it, or they didn't dive as deep as they should have into these standards. And with the professional development that they're going to be going through either over the summer, again, that $500 stipend, or if there's opportunities during the school year for them to receive this professional development, they'll be better prepared to deliver in depth all these standards and cover them.
And I think, Mr. Ford, you related to the credit for the course as well is really important to make sure all students are taking this. And this isn't, some people have said, well, we're rushing this through, and it doesn't start until 2020 with the freshman class, the 2020 freshman class. So that is the point where that credit for high school, mandatory credit for high school, will come into effect. So it'll be the 2023, 24 graduating class then that would fall under that provision.
So it sounds like there's a professional development gap that led to teachers not being comfortable teaching the economic portion of civics and economics.
And it's not as in-depth as what we're teaching right now. I know there's some standards overlap, but it's not as in-depth
All right.
as what we're doing. And you know this, whenever the legislature a few years ago did the Founding Principles Act,
Right.
and then they threw in economics and financial literacy in it, so there's a give and take, and the Lieutenant Governor and the General Assembly feel very passionate that economics and financial literacy should be important, and that's why they're saying it shouldn't be buried into another subject or another course. Sorry.
Ms. White?
Full disclosure, during my teaching career, I had the blessing to teach economics, legal, and political systems. So I cannot tell you how important I feel like this curriculum is for our state. In my present job, I work with at-risk adults who frequently have more month than they have money. And the missing piece is a fundamental misunderstanding about debt, finance, saving, investment, and a simple budget. What comes in must equal what goes out, or else you're in trouble. And so now, working on the back end, I teach financial literacy to adults most Wednesday nights starting in January, and understanding that critical piece. If we could help folks understand even as early as high school, because I keep showing my iPhone, but a non-cash society, a society that is dependent on exchange through, I hate to say Apple Pay or whatever platform, has created a misunderstanding about cost of living, about a contradiction between needs versus wants. So I cannot applaud us enough about putting this back into our standards and providing an opportunity for all students across the state of North Carolina. Most of us are blessed with good training, but we have folks across this state whose families come from poverty, and the structure is not there, and giving that in a high school setting to all students is important.
Dr. Oxendine?
Yes, very good points, Ms. White. Also, Jamie, if you could talk to, and I'm going through this quickly, but I would like, and maybe this topic is rolled into some of the standards, but I'd like to see some thought given to credit. Maybe it's in debt. I don't know.
So that will be in the financial literacy standards. I will send you that link
Okay.
to those. The reason why I pulled out the economics is because a lot of people ask, well, we're already doing this, and the economic standards aren't really, the majority of those aren't in there, so that's why I gave those to you, so you
All
can
right.
see how in depth we're gonna go.
And my final question has to, or point goes to the heart of resources.
Yes.
Anytime we create curricula, we revise it on and on and on, we put our hands on it, teachers get into the, okay, where are the textbooks, where are the digital stuff, on and on.
That's a great question, and thank you for asking. And so first off, there's a financial side of this in the budget, and the money goes towards a $500 stipend for the teachers, because they have to either give up their summer, a week of their summer to do it, or if they take it during the school year, because a lot of superintendents said, well, I hired them over the summer, so what are you going to do? That $500 stipend will either go towards them, or if they miss any days of school, it goes towards their subpay. The rest of that money goes towards the professional development, all the resources that they need. And what we've heard, so the North Carolina Council of Economics will package all that. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, over $1 million will go towards those resources. But also, what a lot of schools have come to us and said, and superintendents and school districts, is, well, we're using EverFi, or with BB&T's thing, or Wells Fargo is a really great partner with us, or Fidelity is a great partner with us. We're saying, keep using those resources. What we're trying to do is get a baseline to train all these teachers and give them all the same equal professional development, so that no student has a different experience when they take this. So there are resources already out there that schools are using, and the resources that the North Carolina Council for Economics is going to provide
Thank
to the
you.
teachers. Sure.
Mr. Ford?
So I have not seen these standards, full disclosure, and in the interest of, I'm thinking now about the students who will be receiving this, And in the interest of equity, so I'm going to raise this, and I know it's going to be controversial, but is there any discussion in these standards about the racial wealth gap and the way wealth is distributed? Because I raise this because the example you gave, those are necessary skills to be able to run your personal finances, to be able to balance your checkbook, and furthermore, if you want to enter entrepreneurship, et cetera. But students of color in particular need to know that even when they do all of these things, even when they have a superior credit score, even when they have exemplary practices, that when they go to apply for a loan, they're still not going to get the same terms as somebody who is white, who has less income and perhaps not as well of a credit score, right? There's a wealth of evidence from renowned economists like Ross Chetty that show the way that economic mobility is distributed in America is racialized, and that it's very, very sticky. And I want to make sure that we're preparing them for the world they're going to go into, right, in the interest of being culturally relevant, but also teach them sound fiscal practices as well. Is there a way we can do both of those things?
This is the legislation as written right now. Ultimately, it'll be a board decision on what you decide collectively on what you want to approve, and you have a year to implement, or sorry, a year to approve anything. These standards don't technically kick in until 2020 freshman class. So I think that's just a discussion you, during your subcommittees, need to have.
I appreciate that.
Yep.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Mr. Buxton.
First off, I really appreciate the way y'all have built the teacher professional development into this, and I think that's important. Appreciate the focus on the issue, and Ms. White has spoken well for all of us, Mr. Ford, about the importance of the issues. One comment, one question. I'm thankful for, in the FAQ, I'm not sure exactly how it plays out in the legislation about the modularization. I mean, one of the challenges I think we're going to have coming up is not rooting ourselves in the 1950s version of high school where every time we see something important, we create a course. And so the opportunity to think about modularization moving forward, I think is really important, because when we did early college, the biggest challenge was the existing schedule and thinking about how you could accelerate kids' learning in 4 to 5 years, given all the stuff that's in there. So I think we've got something that may merit a course, and I think a lot of people have come to that conclusion. Computer science might merit a course down the road. There may be something else we think merits a course as our economy changes and being able to be flexible. So that's just an observation. My first question is, what's a checkbook? I'm just kidding. You said checkbook. You said balancing a checkbook. And
I was
thought,
going to hold my phone up, Mr. Buxton.
what is that thing you're calling a checkbook? My question is, I think that you have put your finger with another number of other folks on the importance of this and kids having this skill. I'm a little concerned by the final exam legislation and the elimination. How do we assess that our kids have in fact learned these skills and our schools are in fact teaching them well? How are we going to know that this course is doing what it needs to do?
I mean, so I guess it's like all other courses, Mr. Buxton, it's going to take time. I mean, there will be testing, even though we're getting rid of, I mean, the teachers still have to test, and we have to have assessments along the way for all of these things. Virginia's doing the same thing. I mean, Virginia is at the place now, they do the best in the nation of anybody, but we don't even have the full, record of what they've done over the last, I guess it's 4 years now. Is it 4 years,
It's
James?
total implementation.
Yeah, it's an implementation. So, I mean, I think that's always the case, whether we're doing competency-based learning or not. That's still the case.
And Mr. Buxton, I also want to chime in that North Carolina is one of 2 states that did the PISA exam on financial literacy. Us in Massachusetts, we were 11% proficient in the state. Hispanics were 5% proficient, and African Americans were 1% proficient. Right. So, that's where we are right now. So if you want to, maybe this is a board policy, maybe the superintendent can petition PISA again to do it as they did before. But once we implement this in 3 years, then ask PISA to come back and see how our students are doing once this is starting to roll. And then maybe, I don't know how often PISA does these tests, but maybe we can set benchmarks out every few years to say, hey, come back and make sure that we're
Here's
progressing.
Follow, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
So my concern is if we've got, 450 high schools in the state, plus charter high schools, and we have 450 different tests of this course, and they're all locally made tests. I'm worried we're not going to get a very good assessment of if this really critical content matter is being taught well and kids are learning at high levels. So instead of having a clear assessment that is high quality and high schools are using across the state, and we know where they're doing well and our kids are in fact getting these skills, to Ms. White's point, we got to have something. And so that's just a concern, given other conversations going on about things like final exams that kind of tie our hands when we try to look at implementation of important stuff. So we can't fix that here, but I just raise that as, that could undermine this effort if we're not careful.
Okay, final question on this topic. Dr. Oxendine.
Just a suggestion tied to your point about accountability in terms of knowing something at the end of the day, end of the course. This might be an opportunity for us to think about competency-based assessments in this course. So we come up with specific skill sets, project-based learning. I think it would be pretty exciting to think about competency-based in a course like this. Just on the table.
Thank you.